To what was leaked several weeks back. The justice is saying we hold that Roe and Casey must be overruled. I want to bring in Terry Moran, who has covered the Supreme Court for many years. Terry, bottom line, what has the court said this morning?
Bottom line, Roe versus Wade is overruled. There is no constitutional right to an abortion in this country anymore as of today. Justice Samuel Alito in, as you say, an opinion that tracks very, very carefully, as far as I can see at this point, with the opinion that was leaked, the draft opinion, says without question it is time to heed the Constitution and return the issue of abortion to the people's elected representatives. Again and again, he knocks down in this opinion, as he did in his draft opinion, the claim that there is a right to choose an abortion in the right to privacy or the right to liberty under the Fourth Amendment. He says that at the adoption of the 14th Amendment and the Constitution, abortion was a crime in this country, and that there was no talk about a constitutional right to an abortion until the latter part of the 20th century. He says that this court does not have to abide by the Roe versus Wade precedent because it was so wrong, because it has not settled the issue. And he says, without question, it is time now to return the issue to the people, which will open the doors, obviously, to all kinds of legislation and laws that have already been passed and are now good law in those states which passed so-called trigger laws. As soon as this opinion comes down, abortion is outlawed in many states in this country. The bottom line, once again, just as it was in Justice Alito's draft opinion, this is an opinion that from now on, there is no more constitutional right to an abortion in the United States.
You know, it's interesting, Terry, because initially in this opinion that had been leaked, Justice Alito had written previously that we cannot allow our decisions to be affected by any extraneous influences, such as concern about the public's reaction to our work, talking about any reaction actually to that leak or what could happen if this ruling came down. And it would seem in delivering the same opinion today that that's exactly what they've done here. They've ignored any potential public reaction to this.
That's right, David. There was some question when the draft opinion was leaked. Boy, this sounds very absolute and extreme. His tone that Roe is egregiously wrong, that any constitutional right must be located in our country's history and traditions. People were concerned about how that might impact gay marriage and other rights that are not specified in the Constitution. It looks to me like he doesn't pull back from any of that. Now, there is a concurrence by Chief Justice Roberts. He concurs in the judgment, so he doesn't sign on to all that, but it looks like 5 justices do. So this is not only overturning Roe, but overturning the entire approach to constitutional law. That just because something might not have been a constitutional right when the Constitution was written in 1787, perhaps the generalities in the Constitution can be read to guarantee these rights to people marrying people of the same sex, to constitutional right to choose abortion. Contraception isn't mentioned in the Constitution either. It does seem that this opinion opens the door not just to overruling Roe versus Wade, but to other rights that many Americans have taken for granted that are based on the same reasoning, that the Constitution can evolve.
Terry Moran, stay with us here. You're watching ABC News live coverage this morning of the Supreme Court's historic ruling this morning, overruling Roe versus Wade in this country. It will have a profound impact on abortion rights in America, in this country. In fact, as you heard Terry mention moments ago, the impact will be felt almost immediately. In 13 states, they have what are called trigger laws, which means it would take any abortion rights off the books as they currently stand. 26 states in totality could actually change their laws almost immediately. There you can see the map on the screen there. Those are the states expected to ban or severely restrict abortion rights almost immediately. I want to bring in Rachel Scott, our congressional correspondent. She's live outside the Supreme Court where people are already demonstrating this morning. Rachel, what's the reaction down there?
David, this is a seismic shift. People from all over the country gathering here today, and take a look at the reaction. We have seen tears of sadness, tears of happiness from people on both sides of the issue today. And take a look, as I want to bring you into the fencing that has been up here around the Supreme Court since that leak draft came out. This fence wraps out around the entire Supreme Court complex because they have been preparing for this moment. David, I've been covering this issue for over a year. I've been traveling to many states, speaking with Republicans that have
Rachel Scott, obviously reaction coming in already and reaction on both sides of this issue in this country. We'll go back to Rachel when we can hear her a little more clearly, obviously being drowned out by the immediate reaction at the court. I want to bring in Kate Shaw, our Supreme Court contributor, legal scholar. And Kate, what do you make of the decision? What stands out to you?
You know, this is one of the most important decisions the Supreme Court has handed down in this century, certainly in the past half century, but it'll stand with among the most important decisions of the Supreme Court. Look, for, nearly half a century, Americans, women, but all Americans, have structured their lives and made their choices with the sort of understanding that if contraception should fail, they have abortion, a constitutionally protected right to terminate a pregnancy, essentially as a backstop. Justice Stephen Breyer, who wrote the dissent for himself, plus Justice Elena Kagan and Justice Sonia Sotomayor, basically writes that the state can control a woman's body and a woman's destiny by taking from her the choice to continue with or to terminate a pregnancy. And I think this will have seismic impact on women's lives and on the choices they can make and really on the course of the country. So it's an enormously consequential decision. And Justice Alito says that it doesn't call into question any of the court's other precedents on things like contraception or same-sex marriage. But the dissent, I think, rightly points out that the logic of the majority opinion very much calls those cases into question, whatever the majority says in insisting that it does not call those rights into question.
Kate, let me ask you, because you point out in the dissenting opinion their states can control a woman's body and destiny. Bottom line, in those 26 states we were just looking at, obviously 13 of them have the trigger laws. Bottom line here, what does the future look like for women in those states if they were going to get an abortion?
Well, as of today, in many states, these trigger laws will go immediately into effect. And in other states, there are laws that have been struck down by courts because they were inconsistent with Roe. And those decisions will no longer be enforceable. And so those laws will come back into effect in many instances. And in several other states, it's clear, because political leaders have said they're going to again pass laws to criminalize or prohibit abortion in all or nearly all instances. And so, those women will either seek to travel to other states if they want to terminate a pregnancy or continue with unwanted pregnancy. And some states have also indicated they're going to move to make it difficult to leave the state to obtain abortion care elsewhere. So, in no way does this decision end the roiling national debate about abortion. In some ways, I think it's going to kick it into higher gear as we see states begin to respond.
Kate Shaw describing a time we haven't seen in this country in 50 years, a situation where women in this country will have to travel across state lines if they're looking to have an abortion, if they're in one of these states that will have a trigger law that goes into effect immediately. In fact, there are 13 of those, 26 in total, that plan to take action almost immediately. So in 26 states in this country, if a woman seeks to get an abortion, will most likely have to travel outside that state to find the opportunity to make that decision on her own. I want to bring in Devin Dwyer, who covers the Supreme Court for us. And Devin, this country knows very well these Supreme Court confirmation hearings, and every time there is a justice who comes before the American people and the Senate, of course, to answer questions, they're always asked about this issue. They're very careful with their answers, but almost always we hear about precedent in this country and respect for precedent, and this law was on the books for 50 years. So what are Americans to make of the answers they heard from some of these justices before?
There's been a lot of attention, David, on those statements and at least the confirmation hearings of the three most recent justices appointed by Donald Trump. Remember, with the express purpose, goal of overturning Roe versus Wade, which they've now accomplished. And during those confirmation hearings, they were asked, will you stand by Roe versus Wade as established precedent? Stare decisis is the doctrine of the Supreme Court. Let decisions stand. And today we saw in a concurrence from Justice Brett Kavanaugh, he said that stare decisis is not absolute. The conservatives today, David, making clear that they have a more expansive, flexible view of stare decisis. And Justice Alito saying that in cases where decisions are egregiously wrong, the court must act. They did that in Plessy versus Ferguson with that separate but equal doctrine way back, Brown versus Board, overturning segregation in schools in the 50s. Today, this conservative majority making clear they're doing just that, correcting a wrong in their view, David.
Devin Dwyer, who's with us here this morning, covers the court for us. Devin, stay with us here. We'll certainly come back to you before the morning is done, our coverage here this morning. Stephanie Ramos is in Mississippi. She's at the clinic that was at the center of this case, testing the future of Roe versus Wade in this country. And Stephanie, what's the scene there?
Well, David, as you could hear, there are some anti-abortion rights activists on a loudspeaker behind me, but you're exactly right. This is the clinic at the heart of the case. It's the only abortion clinic left in the state of Mississippi. It is run by the Jackson Women's Health Organization. It's also known as the Pink House. As you can see, it's a pink building here situated on the corner. Also on the corner, anti-abortion rights activists who are here to persuade women not to get an abortion. Now, this is where the rubber meets the road, David. Families have depended on this clinic. Women have relied on this clinic year after year. A recent estimate showed more than 2,500 women received an abortion here in a year in the state of Mississippi. Now, if this clinic closes, it could have severe impact on the lowest income communities. Keep in mind, here, Mississippi is one of the poorest states in the nation. Now that Roe has fallen, as you mentioned, some 26 states could ban or severely restrict abortions. That's including Mississippi. And we know that women have traveled here from other states like Texas and Oklahoma. They have already set some of these bans in place, but now those women and women here in Mississippi may not have an option to visit this clinic, David.
Stephanie Ramos in Mississippi at the clinic at the center of this case. I want to bring in Carrie Severino. She's the president of Judicial Crisis Network, a conservative organization. And Carrie, I know this is considered a major victory for you and the people that you work with who have been working for 50 years to get Roe overturned.
Absolutely, but most importantly, because this is a return to what the Constitution simply says, and I think that's what the majority opinion is very clear about, is the Constitution nowhere provides the right to abortion. That's something that some states may choose to do, but that's not something that's in the federal Constitution, and the Supreme Court has to limit itself to deciding cases based on the Constitution itself. So this will put that issue back in the hands of our elected representatives. That's where it was for most of American history, and I think that that's where the Constitution leaves it, and so that's the correct result today.
I wanted to ask you, Carrie, about the most recent polling. I know that you're aware of it from the Pew Research Center, also from Quinnipiac just in the last couple of days, that 61% of Americans say abortion should be legal in all or most cases. What do you make of those numbers and the fact that this ruling would appear to go against what the majority of Americans are hoping for, asking for?
It doesn't in any way contradict that. I mean, what this is saying is, yes, if you would like to make abortion legal in all or most circumstances, now you have the ability to do that at the legislative level. That's something that Americans, again, always until 1973, had the ability to legislate on this issue. It's simply not in the Constitution. So the Supreme Court's job is not to look at opinion polls and say, well, what do people want? Let's come up with laws that reflect what people want. No, their job is to simply interpret the Constitution and interpret the laws that are actually passed by Congress and passed by our elected representatives. So if most Americans want to see that, that's what we will see, but we'll see it in a legislative way rather than judges usurping that legislative power.
Carrie Severino, president of Judicial Crisis Network, a conservative organization that has worked to see this day come true. She says this decision is rooted in the Constitution, that this should be at the state level where this decision is made, and that's what she believes the court has decided here today. Carrie, thank you so much for joining us. I want to bring Terry Moran back in because Chief Justice John Roberts did weigh in on this decision. You've had more time to pour through this. What have you found, Terry?
Well, David, this case has 5 conservative justices voting to overrule Roe versus Wade. It has 3 liberal justices opposing that, and it has John Roberts, Chief Justice John Roberts, in the middle. He says that he would have validated the Mississippi law at issue here. Mississippi passed a law banning almost all abortions at 15 weeks. He says that's all you have to decide. You don't have to decide that a woman no longer has a constitutional right to an abortion. And he says we should adhere closely to the principles of judicial restraint here instead of, quote, repudiating a constitutional right we have not only previously recognized, but also expressly reaffirmed. He says that the court is too full of certainty on this issue, and he would wait for the next case to come. He's lost control of this court, but it is significant that a justice as conservative as John Roberts is looks at what his conservative colleagues did and says that that's judicial activism.
Very interesting, Terry, that the Chief Justice was appearing to write that there could have been some sort of meeting in the middle here, some sort of a compromise. As Terry points out, 5 conservative justices, majority opinion, 3 liberals, and then there was the Chief Justice, John Roberts, who said we could validate what Mississippi is asking for, and that's all we have to do. And Terry, one more question before we move on and ask about the White House reaction, what the president might do. We have Dr. Jen Ashton standing by as well. But Terry, one more question for you, because Justice Breyer, in his dissent, talks about the court, how the court will be viewed in this country. And I bring this up because you just talked about the Chief Justice losing control of the court, in so many words, what you just said. Justice Breyer writes that one of us once said that it is not often in the law that so few have so quickly changed so much. For all of us in our time on this court, that has never been more true than today. In overruling Roe and Casey, this court betrays its guiding principles. With sorrow for this court, but more for the many millions of American women who have today lost a fundamental constitutional protection, we dissent. He talks about the court betraying its guiding principles, that there has been such swift change on the court.
And that, David, is what justices are always concerned about, because the power of the Supreme Court comes from the confidence and trust of the people. That is why people respect its opinions. And if its decisions shift because one political party gets to appoint some justices, that erodes confidence. This is bedrock belief of justices throughout our history, that they should abide by the law and the canons of judicial conduct in a way that doesn't seem to communicate to people that they're just another political institution. And what Justice Breyer is saying there explicitly, and what Chief Justice John Roberts is suggesting, is that this is an activist decision. This is a decision that did not have to be made. And that, given the nature of the issue and how it has been brought to the court, will suggest that this is a court not of judges, but of politicians in judges' robes. That is the danger that Justice Stephen Breyer is alerting the country to.
All right, Terry Moran, stay with us here. We'll continue our coverage here this morning. I want to bring in our chief White House correspondent, Cecilia Vega, because, Cecilia, this White House knew since the leaked opinion that this very well could happen. What action have they been planning behind the scenes, if any at all?
Yeah, and David, they have been holding a number of emergency meetings behind closed doors in the weeks since that leaked draft opinion came out, certainly preparing for what has happened here today. And the White House has said all along that they would be ready when and if this time came, but they have played it very close to the vest in terms of what these options are. I will just tell you, we have not heard an official reaction from anybody in the higher levels of the administration, certainly not from the president. He doesn't have anything on his public schedule today. He is getting ready to head overseas for a foreign trip to Europe, but certainly this decision will impact and overshadow so much of this trips to come. The president has asked the Gender Policy Council for what advice on what to do. The White House Council has been weighing legal decisions and moves that the president could make. Lawmakers, advocacy groups have been pitching in these closed-door meetings. So you can see right here on the screen next to me some of the options that are on the table. This is a very broad range, and frankly, we're doing a little tea leaf reading here because they haven't signaled exactly what they will do. We're talking about potentially declaring a public health emergency. They could sue states for being at odds with FDA policy. They could allow abortion pills to be provided at pharmacies. They could ease restrictions on the imports of abortion pills into this country. And there is this one. They could lease federal buildings to abortion providers. The thinking there is perhaps some of those sites are out of jurisdiction of some of these states where the procedure is now banned. But look, David, advocates have told us all along, and certainly even people inside the White House will tell you privately, this is not something the president can executive order, can executive action his way out of, no matter what the president decides to do. If he does decide to go the executive action route, that is not going to overturn this ruling. The president has been lobbying, frankly, the White House has been asking and hopeful that Congress would codify Roe into law. They do not have the votes. The Democrats do not have the votes. Republicans certainly have not wanted that to happen, and there's no expectation that they will after this. But all eyes, particularly from the left and liberals and progressives in this country, are on this White House starting today, starting this minute, to see what they will do to help women in this situation.
Cecilia Vega, our thanks to you on the potential options, though they are limited for sure, that the White House can take, the potential steps that the president might try to take. But again, the road is very limited because, again, you have just witnessed here on our coverage the Supreme Court ruling to overturn Roe versus Wade, allowing states to ban abortions across this country. We have mentioned the numbers before, but if you're just joining us, that means 13 states with so-called trigger laws can move to ban abortions immediately. 26 states in all planning to take action very swiftly. We heard from the president of the Judicial Crisis Network, a conservative organization, Carrie Severino, who said this is what we have been working for 50 years in this country, and she made the case that this should be back to the states. That's where the decision-making on this particular issue should take place. We will, of course, hear the other side of this as we continue our coverage here this morning. I want to bring in former Senator Heidi Heitkamp, who's with us here this morning. Heidi, obviously you come in on the other side of this issue. An extraordinary morning, an historic morning, 50 years of precedent in this country overturned. What's your reaction?
You know, my first reaction is, who is this going to hurt the most? It's going to hurt low-income women who seek abortion mainly for economic reasons, and they can't afford to get on a plane. Once again, the difference between the services that can be provided to rich people in this country and poor people in this country have taken a huge impact today. But more importantly, this is the first time in my history that the Supreme Court has taken a step backward on individual rights. And it is absolutely amazing to me that one president, Donald Trump, can basically override the will of literally millions of people in this country who believe that this procedure should be available and safe for women across the country. There's nothing about this decision that doesn't further divide our country. And by that, I mean, now all of a sudden, we're going to see huge divisions between those red states that state legislators have basically enacted trigger laws. You're going to see huge differences in blue states making abortion available and safe for women. And once again, young women who grow up in a state like mine are going to say, if you can't recognize my right of privacy, I'm not going to live in your state. And so this has huge ramifications for the social fabric and the political fabric of our country. Probably what everybody's going to be analyzing is, how will this affect the midterms? You know, for years we always said one issue voters have really driven this issue. But now, is this going to be a one-issue vote that people on the other side take, and are we going to see implications in the midterms as a result of this decision?
Former Senator Heidi Heitkamp, ABC News contributor, talking about the divisions between red states and blue states in this country only deepening, she believes, because of this particular issue, and now this decision coming down from the Supreme Court, overturning Roe versus Wade this morning. 50 years of precedent in this country, sending it back to the states. And we already know that some 26 states plan to take action, if not immediately, in the very near future, to overturn abortion rights in their particular states. One state where that is not the case is obviously Connecticut, where the governor, Ned Lamont, in May signed the first in the nation reproductive rights legislation. Governor, first of all, your reaction to the court this morning and what this means, in particular for the women in your state, and why you took action in recent weeks.
I'm shocked that 50 years of precedent is being overturned by this court. The idea that politicians can stand between a woman and her doctor and let them make the right choice, and I can guarantee you it's not going to happen here in Connecticut. We're going to respect Roe v. Wade. We've got, by law, Roe v. Wade continues despite what the federal government does. And if there are any women who feel like their rights are being abused in other states, they're welcome here in Connecticut.
And Governor, of course, you're only the governor of Connecticut. You don't have any say over surrounding states or, for that matter, states across this country. What do you make of what you just heard from the former Senator Heidi Heitkamp, who said this is only going to deepen divisions across this country when you have some 26 states planning to take action and a return to the time when women who are seeking an abortion will very likely, if they can afford it, have to travel across state lines in this country to exercise that right?
I agree with her. I think you're going to find people voting with their feet. I think women and companies may decide, I want to go to a state that respects my right to choose, and Connecticut will be one of those states. And if you're somebody coming from Texas where they have vigilante justice and they try and enforce it against the doctor and the woman if she goes out of state, we're not going to let it happen here in Connecticut. We're going to protect those women that come into our state, and we're going to prosecute right back.
Both sides reacting very quickly this morning. Governor Ned Lamont echoing what we heard from former Senator Heidi Heitkamp this morning, describing a country where women will have to go across state lines to exercise their right. Of course, we heard from Judicial Crisis Network on the other side this morning saying that they believe 50 years in this fight has finally brought victory for them from the Supreme Court in returning this to the states to make this decision, that state lawmakers at the local level should decide the future of these rights. I want to bring in our chief medical correspondent and, of course, a board-certified OBGYN, Dr. Jen Ashton, tracking this with us here this morning. And again, Jen, you know I always ask these questions. What's the bottom line for women watching at home this morning? What are their options, and where does that stand in the country right now if this is a situation that you're facing or you fear you could face at some point in the future?
Well, first of all, David, I think not only board-certified OBGYNs, but certified nurse midwives and nurse practitioners and physicians' assistants, everyone in the medical profession who has dedicated their lives to taking care of women, are concerned. But we remain committed medically to providing safe reproductive health care to women. And I want to be clear, this is not just a women's health issue. This affects men in these women's lives, their fathers, their sons, their partners. And reproductive health is not just women's health, it's human health. So I think that what's important right now for women to know is, there will always be options, medical options, surgical options. The key is protecting two lives when a woman is pregnant, not just the life of the woman and the mother carrying that fetus, but the fetus as well. And there are medical conditions that literally put both of those lives at stake. Obviously, there are a plethora of other issues involved when we talk about abortion, but medically, this is literally oftentimes a life or death issue. And I think that the healthcare professionals who were there yesterday will be there today and tomorrow to help these women.
And if you're a woman in one of these 13 states with a trigger law, Dr. Jen, that goes into effect almost immediately banning abortion, what are the options medically?
Well, first of all, it's not one size fits all, David. It depends on the health of that woman. It depends on the gestational age, how far along she is in that pregnancy, which oftentimes is difficult to ascertain. Medication abortions are FDA approved up until 10 weeks, that's 70 days. Again, that's not always a fact that can be known for sure. And there are options to prevent unintended pregnancy. Most people confuse the two, that so-called Plan B, which people may have heard of as the morning after pill. That does not cause a termination or an abortion. That is taken after intercourse to prevent an unintended or undesired pregnancy. It's not 100% effective, but usually it's in the high 90s. The earlier it's taken, the better. Then when you talk about options for medication abortions, this will terminate a pregnancy and cause the evacuation of any contents of the uterus. These are given usually orally with two medications that are FDA approved, and again, up until about 10 weeks. So time is not always on the side of the woman from a medical standpoint. Oftentimes, in cases of a fetal anomaly, that's not
diagnosed until 21 or 22 weeks. So that's where you get that 1% of abortions occurring after 21 weeks, oftentimes because it's not diagnosed before then. It is important to remember also, David, that over 90% of pregnancies, of abortions occur in the first trimester. So that's really when time matters.
Dr. Jen Ashton, we really appreciate your insight here this morning, board-certified OBGYN, and of course our chief medical correspondent, on reaction within the medical community that will have to react swiftly because of the impact this is having on what perhaps they might be able to or not be able to do in some of these states moving forward. Dr. Jen, our thanks to you. We're getting reaction on both sides of the political aisle, Democrats and Republicans. Former President Obama issuing a statement just moments ago saying, today the Supreme Court not only reversed nearly 50 years of precedent, it relegated the most intensely personal decision someone can make to the whims of politicians and ideologues, attacking the essential freedoms of millions of Americans. That tweet sent out by former President Barack Obama just moments ago. On the other side, there is a statement this morning from former Vice President Mike Pence, who said, today life won. By overturning Roe versus Wade, the Supreme Court of the United States has given the American people a new beginning for life, and I commend the justices in the majority for having the courage of their convictions. I want to bring in our chief Washington correspondent, Jonathan Karl. I loathe to talk about the politics of it all because we're talking about women's lives here. And as Jen pointed out, it's not just the woman's life, it's the ripple effect on the entire family, the unit surrounding that woman as well. But the politics are major in this case. And given these two statements, in particular from Mike Pence moments ago, this is something former President Trump and Mike Pence campaigned on going into that election. And then when given the chance, they did appoint, former President Trump did appoint justices who he believed, if the opportunity occurred, would overturn Roe versus Wade. And that's what we've seen here this morning.
And it's a simple fact, David, that without those three Trump-nominated justices, this decision would not have come down this way. What's significant in the statement by Mike Pence, because I think you'll see a lot more of this, is what he says happens next. He says, it is incumbent on all who cherish the sanctity of life to resolve that we will take the defense of the unborn and the support of women in crisis pregnancy centers to every state in America. And then he says this, we must rest and must not relent until the sanctity of life is restored to the center of American law in every state on the land. Here's the truth about Roe v. Wade. For all of these years, Roe v. Wade has kept this issue. It's always been, abortion's been a wedge issue. It's been a divisive issue, but it has been relegated to not the center of American politics because there was a sense that no matter what politicians did, there was a constitutional right to an abortion. Now that's gone. So now you see this in every race, at the state level, at the federal level, the question will be asked, where do you stand on abortion rights? And now you see, one of the leading Republican figures, the former Republican vice president, being the first to come out and say there should be a movement across the entirety of the United States to ban abortion. That's not a position that every Republican holds by any measure, but now this issue becomes much more front and center in our politics and will be right up there as one of the top 1, 2, or 3 issues in the midterm elections.
And John Karl, as you say, it's a fact. The 3 justices appointed by former President Trump, that decision-making allowed then this to happen. And I think in recent times, people will look back to the 2016 election, no matter what side of this issue you're on, and recognizing that that was a significant turning point for the future of Roe versus Wade.
No question at all. And if you look at the polling going into the 2016 election, abortion was not one of the top issues. Abortion is an issue that people long have had strong views about, but wasn't necessarily an issue that people would vote on, certainly not a majority of people on either side of the issue. Now, there's an all-out political fight, not just about supporting justices who may or may not rule one way on a decision, but about whether or not abortion remains legal.
John Carl, our thanks to you this morning. Stay with us here. Our coverage continues. And you heard Terry Moran talking earlier about the Chief Justice John Roberts on the Supreme Court. And we've been able to take more time to read this decision today and what the Chief Justice actually wrote attached to this decision. Obviously, this was written by Samuel Alito, 5 of the conservative justices signing on with Alito, but then Chief Justice John Roberts wrote this separately from that. He said, none of this, however, requires that we also take the dramatic step of altogether eliminating the abortion right first recognized in Roe. Mississippi itself previously argued as much to this court in this litigation when the state petitioned for our review. Its basic request was straightforward: clarify whether abortion prohibitions before viability are always unconstitutional. So again, the bottom line in what I've just read to you is that the Chief Justice said we are not required to take the dramatic step altogether of eliminating the abortion right first recognized in Roe. Which of course is what the conservative justices have gone ahead and done here this morning. An historic morning in this country, no matter what side of the issue you stand on. Roe versus Wade overturned, handing legislation back to the states, the decision making back to the states. We know this will almost immediately have impact on the women in 26 states, 13 of which have what are called trigger laws, which automatically kick in and ban abortion rights in those states. Carol Tobias, the president of the National Right to Life Group, with us here this morning. And Carol, your reaction here this morning.
I'm ecstatic. The Supreme Court has correctly decided that the right to kill unborn children is not in the U.S. Constitution. This is a great day for unborn children and their mothers.
What do you make of the Chief Justice? You heard me, Carol, mention just moments ago what Chief Justice John Roberts, a conservative, wrote, essentially saying we don't need to take the, quote, dramatic step of altogether eliminating the abortion right first recognized in Roe, suggesting that there could have been some sort of compromise. Your reaction to the Chief Justice?
I'm not sure what compromise he would have come up with that would not result in the deaths of many, many preborn babies. I think the court was correctly decided, and I'm very appreciative for the 5 justices who had the courage to say this court was wrong in 1973.
Carol, I know this has been a fight for many of you for 50 years since Roe versus Wade became the law in the land. What do you make of the polling? How do you explain the polling from Quinnipiac just this week, not long ago from Pew Research, that shows more than 60% of Americans do believe that a woman should have the right to an abortion in this country?
I think the interesting information is when you start getting down into the details. Many people would support abortion in some cases, but they certainly do not support the way it is practiced now, abortion legal for any reason for all 9 months of pregnancy. That does not have widespread support, and what the court decision now does is let the people, through their elected representatives, decide what the law should be. And this is a great opportunity for people to start having those conversations. What should the law be? And, where do we want to go? If you don't like the way something is going in the direction in your state, then people have a right certainly to stand up and work for something else.
Carol Tobias, president of the National Right to Life Group. Carol, I know this has been a fight of yours for some time, and we do appreciate you taking the time to talk with us here this morning. Again, very mixed reaction coming in. Carol Tobias just telling us that she is ecstatic with this decision. It's something that she has been fighting along with the people on her team for quite some time in this country. Again, this is a very polarizing issue in this country. You don't need me to tell you that, and we're getting reaction from the other side. For example, the statement from Alexis McGill Johnson, president of the Planned Parenthood Action Fund, just sending out a statement moments ago saying, knowing this moment would come does not make it any less devastating. The Supreme Court has now officially given politicians permission to control what we do with our bodies, deciding that we can no longer be trusted to determine the course for our own lives. That's the reaction coming in from Planned Parenthood, the Action Fund, here this morning. I want to bring back in Cecilia Vega because, Cecilia, I know we're expecting to hear from the House Speaker Nancy Pelosi at any moment now. Any word from the White House
There's no point in saying good morning, because it certainly is not one. This morning, the radical Supreme Court is eviscerating Americans' rights and endangering their health and safety. But the Congress will continue to act to overcome this extremism and protect the American people. Today, the Republican-controlled Supreme Court has achieved their dark, extreme goal of ripping away a woman's right to make their own reproductive health decisions. Because of Donald Trump, Mitch McConnell, and the Republican Party, their supermajority in the Supreme Court, American women today have less freedom than their mothers. With Roe and their attempt to destroy it, radical Republicans are charging ahead with their crusade to criminalize health freedom. In the Congress, be aware of this, the Republicans are plotting a nationwide abortion ban. They cannot be allowed to have a majority in the Congress to do that, but that's their goal. And if you read, and again, we're all studying all this, but if you read what is in the very clear, one of the justices had his own statement. It's about contraception, in vitro fertilization, family planning. That is all what will spring from their decision that they made today. It's such a contradiction. Yesterday, they say the states cannot make laws governing the constitutional right to bear arms. And today, they're saying the exact reverse, that the states can overturn a constitutional right for 50 years, a constitutional right for a woman having the right to choose. The hypocrisy is raging, but the harm is endless. What this means to women is such an insult. It's a slap in the face to women about using their own judgment to make their own decisions about their reproductive freedom. And again, it goes well. I always have said the termination of a pregnancy is just their opening act. It's just their front game. But behind it, and for years, I have seen in this Congress opposition to any family planning, domestic or global, when we have had those discussions and those debates and those votes on the floor of the House. This is deadly serious, but we are not going to let this pass. A woman's right to choose reproductive freedom is on the ballot in November. We cannot allow them to take charge so that they can institute their goal, which is to criminalize reproductive freedom, to criminalize it. Right now, they're saying in states that they can arrest doctors and all the rest. What is happening here? What is happening here? A woman's fundamental health decisions are her own to make in consultation with her doctor, her faith, her family, not some right-wing politicians that Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell packed the court with. While Republicans seek to punish and control women, Democrats will keep fighting ferociously to enshrine Roe v. Wade into the law of the land. This cruel ruling is outrageous and heart-wrenching, but make no mistake, again, it's all on the ballot in November. Supreme
House
Court
Speaker
has
Nancy
ended a
Pelosi
constitutional right.
talking about the midterms approaching, saying all of this will be on the ballot come November. Of course, the politics immediate with an issue this significant in this country on a day of history being made and people feeling so strongly on both sides of this. But you heard the House Speaker there say that American women have less freedom today than their mothers, saying that this, for American women, is an insult, a slap in the face to make their own decisions when it comes to their reproductive health. She talked about a contradiction, she said, in what we saw from the Supreme Court yesterday, saying that, in essence, and you'll remember we covered this yesterday, that New York State could not make decisions that affect the Second Amendment, a right to bear arms, that the states can't make that decision. But then today, saying the states should be the ones making the decision when it comes to a woman's choice about her reproductive future. We'll get into that in a moment. I'll be asking Terry Moran and Kate Shaw if there is, in fact, a legal contradiction there. The House Speaker saying the hypocrisy is raging. But I want to get immediate reaction for what the House Speaker said about American women having less freedom today than their own mothers did. I want to bring in Dr. Janet Cathy, an OBGYN. She's the only doctor at Planned Parenthood in Little Rock. There's only one abortion clinic in the state of Arkansas, the Little Rock Family Planning. And Dr. Cathy, I know that doctors come in from other states, actually, to work at this clinic.
Yes, there are other state providers at the clinic that does surgical care here at Planned Parenthood. I mean, we've had a full schedule of patients today and tomorrow that we're contacting now to tell them that we're going to have to make other arrangements. And the closest, they're going to look at driving 6 to 7 to 8 hours one way to be able to have this care provided for them.
Dr. Cathy, you're among the first to crystallize what this means for women immediately in this moment. And again, I say this no matter where you stand on the issue. Dr. Cathy, just underscore what you just said. Explain that for our viewers who are watching right now. I know that you work at the Planned Parenthood in Little Rock, Arkansas, Little Rock Family Planning. And you just said moments ago that you have now begun to call women to tell them that they're going to have to make alternate plans. And for many of them, that means 6, 7, 8 hour drives ahead to get to other states.
Yeah, just and that, you know, one way. And that, you know, just the expense involved and just the logistics involved. And, you know, I'm thinking of it on a very personal level, just what it's going to take for any one person to manage the logistics of this. It's just going to be a very complicated process that it shouldn't be.
Dr. Janet Cathy, an OBGYN at a Planned Parenthood location in Little Rock, Arkansas. It's in fact the only abortion clinic in that state, describing how they're already calling women to say you're going to have to find other plans. She said dealing on this at a very personal level with women this morning. It just illustrates just how quickly this has impact on real lives in our country. I want to bring in Alexis McGill Johnson. We mentioned what Alexis said. She's the president of Planned Parenthood, the Action Fund. Moments ago, we read her statement on the air. And Alexis, I wanted to get your reaction to what the House Speaker just said about women in this country have less freedom than their mothers, that this is a slap in the face, an insult to women about making their own decisions for their reproductive futures.
Absolutely. I mean, look, I have two daughters who are 13 and 10, and the idea that they will grow up with less rights than I have at the age of 49. My entire life, I have had a belief that that I in freedom and equality, and the fact that we have gone back after 50 years is absolutely devastating. It is devastating, and we are furious.
Alexis, this decision was leaked several weeks back. Samuel Alito obviously authoring the decision for the majority on the Supreme Court. There was some belief that perhaps the language would be tweaked somewhat. It appears that that simply is not the case, that the majority on the court held firm on this. Did you believe that this was coming, given the political dynamic in this country, that the court is now 6-3, given the recent appointments to the court? Or did you think that a 50-year precedent would simply hold despite the political dynamics right now?
We have been believing that this would happen particularly for the last few years, and certainly anyone listening to the oral arguments in December believed that this was a very distinct possibility But there's a difference between belief and hope. And we spent the last, few weeks after this leak still trying to hold on to hope beyond measure that something would be different, that the outrage that the court would see would change someone's mind. Because the reality is this is just going to be devastating. It is going to create a healthcare crisis in this country for people who need access to abortion care. And so, yes, I believed it would happen. I believed that the court showed its hand in that leak. And yet I still tried to have faith and hope that something could be different.
Alexis McGill Johnson, President Planned Parenthood Action Fund. Alexis, who said she's 49 years old, and today she has recognizes that her own daughters have fewer rights, she says, than she did when she was their age, and talking about a decision that they anticipated, but the day has come, and now Planned Parenthood and those who support a woman's right to choose will have to take action on their own moving forward. I want to recap for those of you watching ABC News Live coverage this morning, the Supreme Court overturning Roe versus Wade, a 50-year precedent in this country, turning that decision-making process back to the states on the state level for legislation involving abortion rights. And as you know, if you've been watching here this morning, and forgive me for repeating that number, if you're just joining us though, 26 states plan to take action immediately or very soon, 13 of which have these so-called trigger laws in effect that would trigger a change immediately when it comes to a woman's right to make this decision on her own. The former First Lady Michelle Obama issuing a statement moments ago, "I am heartbroken today. I am heartbroken for people around this country who just lost the fundamental right to make informed decisions about their own bodies." Again, reaction from both sides of the aisle, from former President Obama, the former First Lady, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi moments ago, and then on the other side, former Vice President Mike Pence, who of course ran on this along with former President Trump, who said if elected that they would appoint justices who would overturn Roe versus Wade. You can never predict how many justices a certain president will have an opportunity to appoint to the court. In this case, it was 3, and it changed the makeup of the court significantly. And we are here today. I want to bring in Rachel Scott, who we showed you some time ago down in front of the court. And Rachel, we have seen in these live pictures that the crowd has only grown, and I presume there are people there on both sides of this issue.
Both sides of the issue, David, and the crowd is truly growing by the minute. This is sending a seismic jolt throughout the country, and we are seeing that play out here right in front of the Supreme Court. Because the moment that this decision came out, it was read out here on this loudspeaker, and you had this polarized divide represented. Where on one side you had cheers, applause, tears of joy. On the other, you had immense frustration. I want to give you a look at what we are seeing behind us right now. On one side here, you have people saying Roe is illegitimate. You say this decision is wrong. On the other side, you have people celebrating this. We've also seen the police presence start to grow as well. You can see the lines of officers surrounding this fencing right out here outside of the Supreme Court. This fencing up around the Supreme Court has been up since that draft was leaked. It started and created this immense response out here where we have seen people gather here outside of the Supreme Court every single decision day waiting for this to happen. Advocates say that although this is a seismic shift, that the ground has been shaking for so long because, David, as you have mentioned, 13 states have these so-called trigger bans where abortion would immediately be severely rejected or banned altogether, David.
Mike, Rachel Scott live at the Supreme Court here this morning. Rachel, I really appreciate you reporting in and reflecting the scene there on the ground. The crowd growing with Rachel standing by down there, and we'll go back to her should we need to momentarily. Again, the reaction coming in, both sides of this issue. Many believe this is a victory 50 years in the making in this country. We heard from Carol Tobias, the president of the National Right to Life Committee, who told me she's ecstatic that this was some time in the making. We asked her about the polling in this country that shows the majority of Americans believe this is a woman's right. She said that should be determined at the state level. And that's what many on that side of the argument continue to say here this morning, that what the Supreme Court did was to give this back to the states which is what they have been fighting for all along. On the flip side, we're hearing from former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton moments ago saying most Americans believe the decision to have a child is one of the most sacred decisions there is, and that such decisions should remain between patients and their doctors. Mrs. Clinton says today's Supreme Court opinion will live in infamy as a step backward for women's rights and for human rights here in the U.S. Which takes me back to Cecilia Vega, our chief White House correspondent. Cecilia, you covered Hillary Clinton's campaign going into 2016. This obviously was a major issue on both sides of that campaign. And when we think about recent history in this country, it just shows you an election can then determine, obviously, who gets appointed to the court and can have swift and major impacts on the direction, one way or another, in this country.
I think, David, what we are looking at right now on that screen of what is happening outside of the Supreme Court is the legacy of Donald Trump. This very much is about what Donald Trump did, and it's not just on the Supreme Court in terms of who he appointed. He has appointed a record number of federal judges on federal courts around the country as well. And look, I want to point out we're over an hour since this decision has been made, and we have still yet to hear from President Biden or anyone at the top levels of his administration. We're waiting to find out if, in fact, he will address the nation on this country. Certainly, progressives around the country, not just in Washington, are now looking to him and to his administration as the face for what happens next. He will be the one to push this fight for abortion rights as we head into the midterms in a few months. The Democrats, when you talk to them in the lead up to this, having read this leaked draft opinion, had very much said that the issue of abortion would be a galvanizing one for the midterms. Certainly, that is expected to happen now. And we talk about the politics of this, but we have to remember the polling on abortion has been consistent for decades in our country. By a majority of voters, a 2-to-1 or more than a 2-to-1 margin, believe that the court should have upheld the Roe versus Wade decision. So certainly Democrats will use this going forward. President Biden had said and has been saying in the lead up to this decision that this is now going to be about voters at the ballot box. But what is happening at this turn of events, David, this is not just about federal elections. Certainly they matter. What we're seeing here shows the legacy of former President Trump. This is now very much going to be about state elections and state legislators, governors, particularly in red states, and these states with trigger laws that are now carrying this out at a state level. This is a decision that has an immediate trickle down effect. And David, on the politics of this, I just want to point out one more thing. The White House and administration officials have been sounding the alarm about what this decision means from a broader perspective, that today's decision is about abortion. They very much feel that this could then be interpreted to apply to other civil rights issues, perhaps same-sex marriages. Will this be interpreted as something that could impact those? And Clarence Thomas, in his concurring opinion, I'll leave it to Terry and others to weigh in on this, says that this means the Supreme Court could reconsider substantive due process cases, including same-sex marriage. So they have been sounding the alarm on that, and not just that, things like IVF, in vitro fertilization. And if states are interpreting this as life begins at conception, how many other things in our life will this decision impact today?
Cecilia Vega, who has been reporting for some weeks now, the president's position on this, the Biden administration saying that this decision, if in fact it is the decision, and we learned today that it is, and it did not change from several weeks back when it was leaked, the Biden administration saying this decision does not happen in a vacuum, that it very well could affect many issues in this country beyond simply a woman's right to make her own decision on her reproductive future. I want to bring in Jean Mancini, president for the March for Life. And Jean, we're looking at these live pictures at the Supreme Court, obviously the crowd growing. And as Rachel Scott just reported, and you don't need me to tell you, the crowd growing on both sides of this issue. I just am curious, your reaction here this morning and what you make of the court's decision.
Right. Well, I'm no stranger to growing crowds. So, of course, the March for Life, just by way of explanation, we are the largest annual human rights demonstration. We started the year after Roe v. Wade, and we literally have hundreds of thousands of people cross the Supreme Court every anniversary of Roe v. Wade in January. And we've had collectively millions of Americans march for life over the years. And so I'm just thinking so much about all of the marchers over these years as today Roe has been overturned, and the question of abortion goes back to the legislative branches, primarily in the states, also at the national level. I think it's really important not to fearmonger about what's happening. I mean, some of the news reports are, I think that they can evoke a lot of things that are not reality here. So this is about specifically allowing states to be able to decide when the limits to abortion can happen. So the case that went before the Supreme to lead to this was about allowing a 15-week ban on abortion. And under Roe, our country could not have that 15-week ban on abortion. Let's be clear that the United States is one of only 7 countries around the world that allows late-term abortion. And so this puts us back in line with most mainstream countries in Europe, for example. So now states will have the right to enact limitations, will be able to protect life. And I, for one, am very grateful.
Jean Mancini with the March for Life. Jean, I'm curious what you would say. We had a doctor on earlier who worked at the Planned Parenthood, the only clinic in Arkansas, who this very morning is on the phone with women saying we're going to have to find alternate routes for you, which she said could mean 6, 7, 8-hour drives to other states. What would you say to those women and about those women?
What I'd say is that you've got this, that you've got so many opportunities in front of you, and that is a growing life, an actual human being, the poorest of the poor, the most vulnerable, the unborn that is within you. And we'd love to give you all sorts of resources to choose adoption, to be able to support you to make the choice for life. But there's also chemical abortion in this country. There are also other states. So what we're not talking about here is abortion being made illegal in the United States. What we are talking about is states being able to reflect what the people want through their votes. So if she, that woman has all sorts of different options in front of her, and I would offer that adoption is a beautiful and noble and viable option as well.
Jean Mancini, the President March for Life, pointing out that the marches began 1 year after Roe versus Wade, some 50 years ago, embracing what they consider a major victory this morning from the Supreme Court. Our thanks to Jean for weighing in here with us here this morning. I want to bring back in Terry Moran, who has covered the Supreme Court for many years for ABC News. And Terry, we heard from the House Speaker just a short time ago talking about what many are going to feel is a bit of a contradiction, a bit of whiplash between yesterday's ruling on guns and then today's ruling on abortion. I know there are many differences in both of these cases, but at sort of the 30,000 feet here, the gun decision said the states couldn't make decisions on guns that would affect the Second Amendment. Today's decision says the states should make the decision on a woman and her reproductive future. Help people at home who are going to hear this, and some who will believe, yes, that does sound like a contradiction, like there is hypocrisy at work here.
Well, David, conservatives would say the answer is simple. Guns, arms are in the Second Amendment to the Constitution. Abortion is not. But that begs the question, really. There are many rights we take for granted that are not in the Constitution. The right to travel across state lines, the right of bodily integrity. You can't be forced to take medicine or undergo medical procedures. That's a right not found in the Constitution. The right to choose contraceptives, the right to marry someone of the same sex. All of these rights are not enumerated in the Constitution. Neither was abortion. And so that begs the question, as I say. But we are in a new era in the Supreme Court of the United States, and therefore in our country. The Supreme Court is now in the hands of not only very deeply conservative justices, but activist justices. What you saw yesterday and today are justices who reach out to decide on the sweeping grounds, the most sweeping grounds, the biggest issues, and award victory in these very, very serious and intense national debates to one side. That is what's happening. And I just want to let you know what Justice Stephen Breyer said about it in dissent. He said that Roe versus Wade was upheld in 1991 by the votes of Justices Sandra Day O'Connor, Anthony Kennedy, and David Souter. He said those were judges of wisdom, he says. They would not have won any contests for the kind of ideological purity that some court watchers want the justices to deliver. But if there were awards for justices who left this court better than they found it, and who for that reason left this country better, and the rule of law stronger, sign them up. We are in a new era where the reaching for the center to keep the court's legitimacy in the eyes of the public, to keep the debate going, is over. And we have a very, very strongly activist conservative court.
Terry Moran talking about a new era. Terry, thank you for that insight. A new era for the Supreme Court and this country, one in which the Chief Justice John Roberts seemed to allude to as well in what he wrote. We had mentioned this earlier. He said that we do not need to take the dramatic step of altogether eliminating the abortion right first recognized in Roe, but the Chief Justice not getting his way on that point. 5 justices, conservative justices, joining the majority opinion written by Samuel Alito, and very, very similar to the opinion that was leaked some weeks ago. A final thought from Kate Shaw, our legal scholar and our Supreme Court contributor. Kate, just for folks watching and digesting it here this morning, bottom line on the level of impact on lives across this country, of course, in particular on women's lives in this country. What do you make of the ruling?
Enormous and immediate impact, David. And I think that it will affect people's access in very tangible ways to a medical procedure that they have become accustomed to having the right to access now for nearly half a century in many, many states, over half of the states. And as the dissent points out, some states have passed bans that don't have exceptions for rape or incest. And in those states, girls or women could be forced to carry to term their rapist children. And as the polling tells us, those are incredibly unpopular laws, and yet several states have moved to or actually passed those laws. And so incredibly dramatic impact. And I also think impact for other rights. What the court says is, in trying to figure out what liberty means or what equality means, we have to look to history. And the dissent says, well, if we're looking at history, most of history didn't acknowledge that women had full, equal citizenship. And so history is always going to cash out in ways that aren't advantageous to women and to their full liberty and equality. And so I don't think this decision stops in any way with access to abortion. And I do think that things like contraception and also, same-sex marriage are very much, up for grabs based on the method that the majority opinion uses. So I think this case is about much more than just abortion.
Kate Shaw on the immediate impact on women across this country, and then the questions being asked right now about issues beyond abortion in this country that could be impacted given the decision from the Supreme Court today and how they came to that decision. The fact that it could now impact other issues in this country, deeply personal issues in this country. One last check-in over at the White House. Mary Bruce, our senior White House correspondent, standing by waiting for word from the president. And we expect to hear from President Biden at some point today, Mayor.
David, we have just learned that the president will be speaking here in about an hour at 12:30. We will have to wait until then, it seems, to get any reaction from the president. He has, though, of course, in the past said that this would be a radical decision. He has warned, as you have been discussing, of the potential trickle-down effect of this decision, how it could impact other rights in this country. And he has been bracing for this decision, weighing his potential executive options. I asked the White House yesterday how quickly the president would move on any executive action. They said he's still weighing his options. It seems he hasn't made a decision yet. And while there's certainly are plenty of things he could possibly do, the president is also well aware that an executive order can't reestablish a constitutional right, and that any action he takes is likely to be caught up in protracted legal battles. And that is why I suspect you will hear the president again today saying that this comes down to voters, that it's not just about elected officials at the state level, which will be incredibly important going on, but also who represents Americans here in Washington. Because, of course, Congress could pass legislation codifying Roe. That is something the president has called for. But that means that Americans are going to have to get out and elect more pro-abortion right candidates. And that is something that the president has been urging for. I think you're going to hear him make that plea again today, David.
Mary Bruce reporting from the White House that we will be hearing from the president shortly, reacting to this historic move from the Supreme Court. When the president speaks, we will bring that to you live. In the meantime, as you've been watching our coverage this morning, the Supreme Court overturning Roe versus Wade, turning that decision-making back to the states, and we know that will have immediate impact in some 26 states in this nation, 13 of which have trigger laws, they call them, which immediately change abortion rights and access in their states. Our coverage is going to continue on ABC News Live and abcnews.com. I thank our team for their careful and thoughtful analysis on all sides of this issue, and I'll be back, of course, with the president when he addresses the nation, and then later for our coverage on World News Tonight. I'm David Muir in New York. Until then, good day.
This has been a special report from ABC News.